while we are all cognizant of infections as being a problem, I wonder just how much you realize how dangerous the issue of superinfections is throughout the world. You know about the flu, and you've heard about the bird flu, and you've heard about the swine flu, and it's a big problem. They are part of a family called viruses. We don't really have yet truly effective treatments for viruses, although we're learning to attenuate them. That means decrease their potency. But there's no question that there could be a pandemic or a global epidemic of flu or flu-like infections that could take out a large percentage of the world population because our treatments may not adequately decrease their danger, or because our vaccines may not be created fast enough so that we can prevent people from getting the infection. So that's a big problem. But let's also talk about bacteria, because that's very important. Bacteria, you use an antibiotic for. People will oftentimes come to my office and say, I have a cold, give me an antibiotic. That's not going to happen, because if you have a cold, if it's truly an upper respiratory infection and it's from a virus, the antibiotics won't do anything. Now, if it's a bacteria, it depends. Sometimes it's better to let them take their course. And the reason for that is because if we're constantly using antibiotics, then what happens is the bacteria want to survive just as you do, so they mutate through an evolutionary process, and they evolve into a stronger bacteria that's resistant to the antibiotic we give them. And they do this very quickly because their populations reproduce sometimes in a matter of seconds. So this is an extremely important issue. You've heard about MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, that you can get from bodily contact. The hospitals are spreading it amongst patients from one to the other. This is a big deal. Although it's been a little bit better controlled, the resistance is still there. There is a bacteria coming out of the water supply in New Delhi that I've heard about that at this point looks like there is no particular treatment at all for it. And we know that a small percentage of people who get the sexually transmitted disease gonorrhea, that years ago you used to be able to treat with an antibiotic like penicillin, a shot in the butt, is no longer sensitive to antibiotics, a small percentage. You can't treat it all. That is absolutely horrific. Now, why is that? Well, one reason I just mentioned, right? We've been using too many antibiotics. People pressure doctors to give it. Middle ear infections in kids, doctors will give antibiotics even though they've been told repeatedly that they should let it take its course most of the time and that it resolves by itself and the body builds up its own immunity. But instead, the doctor will prescribe antibiotics. The little kid's mom or dad will insist on it because they don't want to deprive their child of the best of care. And the result is that the bugs become more resistant. We need to create more antibiotics. It's not quite as profitable to make new antibiotics. There aren't a lot of new antibiotics in the pipeline. Even if we could make money from it, or companies could make money from it, the fact is it's really not easy to produce those antibiotics. So we have the potential for an extraordinary disaster. And they say, no big deal. Well, let's talk about antibiotics being given in feed to animals like chickens. We do this in order to decrease the amount of infections in these animals, and then you're eating that feed, and the result is that you're eating actually resistant bacteria that are resistant to the antibiotic that's being used. We are creating resistance. You say, well, no big deal. And I want to just read some numbers. I didn't memorize them, from the European Union about how many people died in the last year or die annually just as a result of eating chicken. The number is 1,518, and there's 67,236 days that are in the hospital for yet others just as a result of eating chicken. We need to control that. And what's very important to remember, whether you're on the right or left politically, is that microbes follow a biologic imperative, not the free market. And we have to figure out how to control those microbes in an overpopulated world, in a world where infections spread all over the place very, very quickly, and where resistance is building enormously. Tens of thousands of people actually are already dying from germs that we can't treat. That's going to increase, and there is a chance that we could see an epidemic one day in the not distant future from one of these bacteria. It's time to make a change. It's time for you to talk to your doctor about this. It's time not to ask for antibiotics when you don't need them.